The morning air tasted of copper and dust, that peculiar flavor of early September when summer refuses to surrender its grip on the Virginia countryside. I remember how the leather reins felt between my fingers that day, warm and slightly damp, the familiar texture that had become as natural to me as my own skin over the past 8 years. Sultan shifted beneath me, his massive Hanoverian body moving with the kind of fluid grace that made people stop and stare at competitions. His coat gleamed like polished mahogany in the slanted morning light, each muscle defined and perfect beneath my calves. The scent of him filled my nose, that intoxicating mixture of clean horse, leather tack, and the faint sweetness of the premium feed I imported from Germany at considerable expense. "Easy, boy," I murmured, feeling his ears flick back toward my voice. The sound of his breathing, deep and rhythmic, matched the beating of my own heart. This was my sanctuary, these pre-dawn hours when the rest of the world still slept, and it was just Sultan and me in the covered arena, working through our dressage movements with the precision of a ballet. The sand beneath his hooves made soft crunching sounds, almost musical in their rhythm. My thighs ached pleasantly from holding the correct position, that burning sensation that meant I was doing it right, staying balanced, keeping my core engaged the way my instructor Petra had drilled into me over countless lessons. The barn smelled like it always did in early morning, a rich cocktail of hay, wood shavings, leather oil, and that indefinable earthy scent that all stables possess. I breathed it in deeply, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest ease as it always did when I was here. This place was more than a hobby, more than a pastime. It was the space where I could breathe, where the constant pressure of my marriage to Richard didn't follow me, where the woman I used to be before I became Mrs. Richard Thornton could still exist. Sultan executed a perfect piaffe, his front legs lifting and falling with metronomic precision, his haunches lowered, every movement controlled and powerful. Pride swelled in my chest, making my throat tight with emotion. We'd worked 18 months to perfect this movement, countless hours of patient repetition, of failure and frustration and tiny increments of progress. Petra had said just last week that we were ready, that Sultan and I had finally achieved the kind of partnership that made champion combinations, that we should seriously consider competing at the international level again. Beautiful, Andrea. Absolutely beautiful. The voice came from the arena entrance, and I recognized it instantly. Margaret Chen, the president of Riverside Equestrian Club, stood watching with her hands clasped together, her face glowing with genuine admiration. The morning light caught the silver threads in her dark hair, and I could see the steam rising from the travel mug of coffee she always carried. The scent of it drifted across the arena, mixing with the smell of horse and leather. I brought Sultan to a halt, feeling the immediate responsiveness in his body, the way he waited for my next cue with an attentiveness that still thrilled me after all these years. My hands were steady on the reins, but I could feel the slight tremor in my fingers that always came after intense work, that combination of adrenaline and physical exertion that left me simultaneously exhausted and energized. "Thank you, Margaret," I called back, unable to keep the smile from my face. The expression felt good, stretching muscles that seemed permanently tense lately. "We've been working on that transition for weeks. He's finally getting it." Margaret walked closer, her boots making soft thuds on the packed dirt aisle that bordered the arena. She wore her usual barn outfit, practical and worn, the clothes of someone who genuinely worked with horses rather than just wrote checks for them. "Getting it? Andrea, that was textbook perfect. You two are going to dominate at the regional championships next month. I've already got half the club planning to carpool down to watch." The mention of the competition sent a flutter through my stomach, that peculiar sensation of excitement mixed with anxiety. My palms grew slightly damp against the reins, and I could feel Sultan sense my tension through the subtle shift in my seat. I consciously relaxed my shoulders, letting the breath flow out slowly through my nose. "I hope you're right. We've put in the work. Sultan's ready. I just hope I don't mess it up for him." "Oh, stop," Margaret said, waving her hand dismissively. The gesture released a waft of her perfume, something light and floral that seemed incongruous with the barn setting. "You're one of the best riders we have. Petra says you're the most naturally talented adult amateur she's ever coached, and you know Petra doesn't hand out compliments lightly." I did know that. Petra Hoffman had trained Olympic riders in her native Germany before moving to Virginia 15 years ago. Getting praise from her was like extracting blood from a stone, each word carefully weighed and genuinely meant. The memory of her stern face breaking into a rare smile during our last lesson sent warmth spreading through my chest. pushing back the cold knot of anxiety that seemed to live there permanently these days. "How's Richard doing with all this?" Margaret asked, and I felt my entire body stiffen. Sultan immediately sensed it, his ears pinning back slightly, his muscles tensing beneath me. He was so attuned to me, this magnificent creature, able to read my emotional state through the tiniest physical cues. It was one of the things that made him such an exceptional partner, this almost telepathic connection we'd developed, but it also meant I couldn't hide anything from him. The question hung in the air between us, heavy and uncomfortable. I could feel the sun growing warmer on my shoulders, could hear the other horses beginning to move in their stalls, the soft nickering and rustling that signaled morning feeding time. The barn manager, Tom, would be arriving soon, and the peaceful solitude of early morning would dissolve into the organized chaos of a busy training facility. Richard, I said finally, trying to keep my voice neutral. The words felt thick in my mouth, tasting bitter. My jaw was clenched tight, and I had to consciously relax it, feeling the ache where I'd been grinding my teeth in my sleep again. He thinks this is all frivolous, a waste of money. He made that clear again at dinner last night. Margaret's expression shifted, her features tightening with concern. She'd been married 35 years to a man who supported her passions, who showed up to every competition, who'd built her a training barn on their property as an anniversary gift. She couldn't fully understand what it was like to love something so deeply and have your spouse treat it like an embarrassing indulgence, a character flaw that needed to be corrected. "But Sultan is yours," Margaret said carefully. "The registration is in your name. You bought him with your inheritance from your grandmother before you even met Richard. And you've won how much in prize money over the years? This isn't just a hobby, Andrea. This is serious sport. Try explaining that to Richard," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. My hands tightened on the reins, and Sultan shifted beneath me, reminding me with his movement to stay present, to breathe, to not let the anger take over. I loosened my grip, feeling the leather slide slightly against my palms. The sun had risen higher now, sending shafts of light through the arena's windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. He sees the bills, the boarding fees, the training, the vet, the farrier, the competition entries, the travel. He adds it all up and tells me I'm being selfish, that we could be using that money for investments, or vacations, or his golf club membership. His golf club membership costs more than Sultan's annual expenses, Margaret pointed out, her voice dry. She'd seen Richard's car, the Mercedes SUV he'd insisted on buying last year, fully loaded with every conceivable option. She knew what he spent on his wardrobe, his watches, his business dinners that always seemed to include bottles of wine that cost more than a month of horseboarding. "I know," I said quietly, "but that's different, apparently. That's networking. That's career development. That's what successful men do." The words came out flat, rehearsed, because they were. I'd heard them so many times, repeated in Richard's voice with that particular tone he used when explaining things to me, like I was a particularly slow child. My stomach churned with familiar nausea, the kind that had become almost constant over the past year, especially bad in the mornings before I came to the barn. I dismounted, needing to move, to do something with the restless energy that thinking about Richard always generated. My legs felt slightly shaky as they took my full weight, that pleasant weakness that came from a good ride. Sultan's warmth radiated against my side as I ran my hand down his neck, feeling the dampness of sweat beginning to form under his mane. His scent was stronger now, earthier, mixed with the tang of honest work. "Come on, boy," I murmured to him, starting to lead him toward the wash stall. "Let's get you cleaned up." Margaret walked alongside us, her presence comforting even in silence. The barn was coming alive now, the sound of other boarders arriving, car doors slamming, voices calling greetings. I could hear Sarah's distinctive laugh from somewhere near the tack room, and the deeper rumble of Tom's voice as he started morning feed. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the barn office, mixing with the ever-present scent of hay and horses. In the wash stall, I turned on the hose, letting the water run over my hand until it was the right temperature, cool but not cold. Sultan stood perfectly still as I began to spray him down, the water darkening his coat, running in rivulets down his legs. Steam rose slightly in the morning air, creating an almost magical effect in the slanted sunlight. I worked methodically, using the sweat scraper to remove the excess water, my movements automatic from years of repetition. The physical work felt good, centering, the kind of simple task that required just enough attention to quiet the anxious chatter in my mind. "You know what I think?" Margaret said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. She'd been leaning against the stall wall, sipping her coffee, just being present. "I think Richard is jealous." I paused mid-stroke, the scraper dripping water onto the rubber mats. "Jealous? Of what?" "Of this." Margaret gestured around us, encompassing the barn, the horses, the whole world we'd built here. "Of the fact that you have something that's entirely yours, something you're exceptional at, something that brings you joy that has nothing to do with him. You shine here, Andrea. Everyone can see it. You're confident, competent, strong. Maybe that threatens him." The observation landed in my chest like a stone, heavy and uncomfortable. My throat tightened, and I had to blink rapidly against the sudden burning in my eyes. I turned back to Sultan, pressing my forehead against his warm shoulder, breathing in his scent, letting his solid presence ground me. His skin was soft against my face, still damp, smelling clean and horsey and safe. "That's a depressing thought," I managed to say, my voice muffled against Sultan's coat. "But maybe an accurate one," Margaret said gently. "I've seen how he looks at you when he comes here, which isn't often, by the way." "When was the last time Richard came to watch you ride?" I couldn't remember. The realization hit me with surprising force. 2 years ago? 3? He'd come to my first competition with Sultan, back when we were dating, back when he'd seemed charmed by the fact that I had this unusual passion. He'd taken photos, told his friends about his girlfriend who competed in dressage, made it seem quirky and interesting. But after we married, after the novelty wore off, the visits had stopped. The interest had curdled into something else, something that felt like contempt. "He doesn't have time," I said automatically, then hated myself for making excuses for him. The words tasted like ashes in my mouth. Margaret made a non-committal sound, the kind that spoke volumes without actually saying anything. She drained the last of her coffee, and I could hear the slight slurp as she got the final drops. "Well, I should get going. I've got a lesson with Petra in 30 minutes, and you know how she is about punctuality. But Andrea, don't let anyone make you feel small for loving what you love. Sultan is lucky to have you, and you're lucky to have him." After she left, I finished with Sultan, picking out his hooves, checking his legs for any heat or swelling, giving him his morning supplements mixed with a handful of grain that he lipped up delicately from my palm. His breath was warm and slightly sweet against my hand, his whiskers tickling my skin. I led him back to his stall, a spacious 12 by 12 with windows on 2 sides and thick bedding of premium shavings that I paid extra for. He had a hay net full of Timothy hay, a salt lick, and a water bucket that I checked to make sure was clean and full. "See you tonight, handsome," I told him, scratching behind his ears in the spot that made him lower his head with pleasure, his lower lip drooping comically. The gesture made me smile despite everything. Be good for Tom. Driving home, I felt the familiar transition happen, the way my shoulders gradually rose toward my ears, the way my jaw clenched tighter with each mile closer to the house Richard and I shared in the upscale neighborhood of Oak Hills Estates. The houses here were large and pretentious, each trying to outdo the next with elaborate landscaping and 3-car garages and perfectly manicured lawns. Our house was a modern colonial, all white pillars and black shutters, chosen by Richard for its impressive curb appeal and what it said about his success. I'd wanted something smaller, cozier, with character and warmth, but that discussion, like so many others, had ended with Richard's preferences prevailing. The garage door opened with a mechanical whir, and I pulled my old Honda inside, parking next to Richard's Mercedes. The contrast between the vehicles was almost comical, my sensible sedan covered in a fine layer of barn dust, next to his gleaming luxury SUV that he washed twice a week. I sat for a moment in the sudden silence after turning off the engine, my hand still gripping the steering wheel, trying to gather the energy to go inside, to face whatever mood Richard was in this morning. The kitchen smelled like expensive coffee and the vaguely chemical scent of Richard's cologne, something Italian and designer that he bought in quantities that always made me wince at the price tag. He was sitting at the breakfast bar, already dressed for work in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Sultan's saddle, scrolling through his phone with one hand while holding a mug in the other. He didn't look up when I entered. "You're late," he said, his voice flat and cold. His jaw was set in that particular way that meant he was angry about something. I could see the muscle ticking near his ear, could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from pavement. I glanced at the clock on the microwave. 7:45. "Late for what? You don't leave for work until 8:30. "Late for being a wife," he said, finally looking up. His eyes were hard, that pale blue that had once seemed attractive but now just looked cold. "You were supposed to make breakfast this morning. Or did you forget about that while you were playing with your horse? The word playing was delivered with such contempt that I felt it like a physical blow. My stomach clenched, and that familiar sensation of being small and wrong washed over me. But something else rose up too, a flicker of anger that I tried to push down. I was at the barn, I said, keeping my voice level. I told you last night I had an early morning ride. We're training for regionals. Right, the regionals, Richard said, setting down his phone with a sharp click against the granite counter. The sound echoed in the kitchen, harsh and final. Another weekend wasted. More money thrown away on your ridiculous hobby. Do you have any idea how much you've spent this year alone on that animal? Sultan is not that animal, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. My hands were clenched at my sides, nails digging into my palms. He has a name. And yes, I know exactly how much I've spent because I track every expense. It comes from my personal account, from my inheritance. We've had this discussion. Your personal account, Richard repeated, his voice dripping with mockery. That's funny, because I don't remember personal being part of our marriage vows. I thought it was supposed to be ours, but apparently that only applies when it's convenient for you. The accusation was so wildly unfair that for a moment I couldn't even respond. Richard made 3 times my salary in his position at the investment firm. He spent money freely on himself, on his hobbies, on his appearance, never once consulting me or worrying about whether it was from our money or his money. But my horse, the one thing I'd brought into the marriage that was entirely mine, was somehow a subject of constant scrutiny and criticism. That's not fair, I said quietly, hating how my voice shook. I could feel tears threatening, that hot pressure building behind my eyes, and I absolutely refused to cry in front of him. Not again. You know that's not fair. What's not fair? Richard said, standing up, his body language aggressive, taking up space, making me want to step back even though he'd never actually hit me. Is that I'm working 60-hour weeks trying to build our future while you're out there spending money on an animal and pretending it's some kind of career? It's not a career, Andrea. It's a hobby, a very expensive hobby that you should have outgrown by now. Sultan is a European champion, I said, my voice firmer now, drawing strength from somewhere deep inside. He's worth over $200,000. I've won prize money every season we've competed. This isn't just a hobby, Richard. This is serious equestrian sport. $200,000, Richard repeated slowly, and something in his tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. His expression had changed, a calculating look entering his eyes that I didn't like. And you're spending how much a month to keep him? $5,000 more or less, I said, suddenly wary. Depending on the month, whether we're competing, vet bills, that sort of thing. Why? $5,000 a month, Richard said, pulling out his phone again, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen. $60,000 a year. On one horse. That's absolutely insane, Andrea. That's a luxury car payment. That's a vacation home. That's our retirement fund. It's my money, I said again, more firmly. My heart was pounding now, adrenaline flooding my system, that fight-or-flight response kicking in. From my inheritance, we agreed when we got married that I would keep that money separate for Sultan. You agreed to this. I agreed when I thought it was a temporary thing, Richard snapped. I thought you'd grow out of it. We've been married 6 years, Andrea. 6 years of watching you pour money into that barn while I'm trying to build something real for us. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of you choosing a horse over your marriage. That's not what I'm doing, I protested. But even as I said it, I wondered if it was true. Had I been choosing Sultan over Richard? Or was I just trying to hold on to the one piece of myself that Richard hadn't tried to reshape into something more convenient for him? It's exactly what you're doing, Richard said. He turned away from me, staring out the kitchen window at our perfectly landscaped backyard. I could see his reflection in the glass, could see the hard set of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. I've tried to be patient. I've tried to be understanding. But this has to stop, Andrea. It's time for you to grow up and put your energy into our marriage instead of living in some fantasy world where you're still 25 and single and can afford to waste money on expensive toys. The words hit me like slaps, each one designed to hurt, to diminish, to make me feel foolish and childish. My face felt hot, my eyes burning with unshed tears. Sultan isn't a toy, and wanting to continue competing in a sport I love doesn't make me immature. Lots of adult amateurs compete. Margaret is 62 and she just qualified for nationals. Margaret is rich, Richard said bluntly. Her husband made his money in tech and retired at 50. They can afford her hobbies. We can't. Or rather, We could if we were smart about it, but throwing $60,000 a year at a horse isn't being smart about it. What do you want me to do? I asked, my voice small now, all the fight draining out of me. I felt exhausted suddenly, bone-deep tired in the way that these conversations always made me feel, like I was trying to swim upstream against a current that was just too strong. What would make you happy? Richard turned back to face me, and his expression was calmer now, almost gentle. This was the version of him that was somehow worse than the angry one, because it felt like manipulation, like a mask he put on to get what he wanted. I want you to sell him, he said simply. Sell Sultan. Take the $200,000 and invest it properly. Put it toward our future. Use it for something that benefits both of us instead of just feeding your selfish need for attention and validation from strangers at horse shows. The words didn't make sense at first. My brain couldn't process them, like he'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Sell Sultan? Sell my partner, my companion, my safe place, the living being who knew me better than anyone else in the world? The idea was so incomprehensible that I just stared at him, my mouth opening and closing without sound. No, I finally managed to say. The word came out stronger than I expected, ringing in the kitchen with surprising force. No, absolutely not. I'm not selling Sultan. Richard's face hardened again, the gentle mask slipping away. Then we have a problem, he said coldly, because I'm not willing to keep subsidizing this anymore. One way or another, Andrea, this is going to end. You can do it on your terms, or I'll do it on mine. But it's going to end. He picked up his briefcase and walked out, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen with my heart pounding and my hands shaking and the sour taste of fear in my mouth. The front door slammed, and moments later I heard his car start, the engine purring smoothly as he backed out of the driveway and drove away. I stood there for a long time, unable to move, my mind racing through the implications of what had just happened. Richard had essentially issued an ultimatum. Sultan or him, the horse or the marriage. And what scared me most was that I didn't immediately know which one I would choose. What kind of wife did that make me? But then, what kind of husband forced his wife to choose in the first place? I didn't go to work that day. I called in sick, which wasn't entirely a lie because my stomach was churning with nausea and my head pounded with a tension headache that made the light hurt my eyes. Instead, I drove back to the barn, needing the comfort of the familiar smells and sounds, needing to see Sultan, to touch him, to reassure myself that he was still there, still mine, still real. The barn was busier now, mid-morning activity in full swing. I could hear the rhythmic thud of hooves in the covered arena where someone was taking a jumping lesson, the instructor's voice carrying across the distance with sharp corrections and occasional praise. The outdoor ring had 3 riders working independently, their horses moving through various exercises while they chatted with each other, that easy camaraderie that existed among people who shared a passion. Sultan was dozing in his stall, one hip cocked, his head lowered in that particular way horses have of sleeping while standing. His eyes were half closed, his lower lip drooping, completely relaxed. When I approached, his ears swiveled toward me before his head came up, and he nickered softly, that low rumbling sound that meant he was happy to see me. The sound made my throat tight with emotion. "Hey, beautiful boy," I murmured, letting myself into his stall. The shavings were fresh, springy under my boots, smelling of pine and cedar. Tom had already mucked out and filled the water bucket, efficient as always. Sultan nuzzled my shoulder, his whiskers tickling my neck, his breath warm and grassy sweet against my skin. I wrapped my arms around his massive neck, pressing my face into his mane, and finally let myself cry. The tears came hot and fast, soaking into Sultan's coat, my body shaking with sobs that I'd been holding back for hours, maybe for months. Sultan stood perfectly still, patient and solid, occasionally turning his head to blow softly into my hair, that gentle, comforting gesture horses make when they sense distress. His heart beat steady and slow beneath my cheek, a counterpoint to my own racing pulse. "I don't know what to do," I whispered to him, my voice muffled and thick. "I don't know how to fix this." "Andrea?" The voice made me jump, and I hastily wiped at my face, trying to compose myself. But it was just Petra, standing at the stall door, her lined face creased with concern. She was dressed in her usual teaching uniform of breeches and boots and a polo shirt, her graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. "What's wrong? Is Sultan hurt?" "No," I managed to say, my voice rough. "No, he's fine. It's complicated." Petra opened the stall door and stepped inside, moving with the confidence of someone who'd spent 60 years around horses and feared nothing. She was small and wiry, tough as leather, with eyes that saw everything and missed nothing. "Complicated with your husband," she said flatly. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. Fresh tears threatened, and I blinked them back furiously, hating this weakness, this inability to control my emotions. "He wants you to quit," Petra said. Again, not a question. She'd seen this scenario play out before, had watched talented writers give up their passion for partners who didn't understand or support them. Her voice held a particular edge of disapproval that she never tried to hide. "He wants me to sell Sultan," I corrected, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. "He says it's too expensive, that I'm being selfish, that I need to grow up and focus on our marriage instead." Petra made a disgusted sound, something between a snort and a hiss. "Scheisse," she muttered, lapsing into German the way she always did when she was angry. Always the same story. The man is intimidated by the woman's success, by her independence, by the fact that she has something in her life that does not revolve around him. So he tries to take it away, to make her small enough to fit into his narrow vision of what a wife should be. Her words were so close to what Margaret had said that morning that something clicked in my mind, a piece of understanding falling into place. Richard wasn't just worried about money. If he was, he would have objected to his own expensive habits. This was about control, about keeping me dependent on him, about eliminating the one area of my life where I was confident and successful and didn't need him at all. "But what do I do?" I asked helplessly. "If I refuse, he'll make my life miserable. He's already threatening that he'll end it on his terms if I don't do it on mine. What does that even mean?" Petra's expression turned grim. She reached out and stroked Sultan's shoulder, her weathered hand moving with practiced affection over his coat. "It means you need to be very careful," she said quietly. "Men like your husband, when they don't get what they want through persuasion, they sometimes take matters into their own hands." A chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the barn. "What are you saying? You think Richard would hurt Sultan?" "I think Richard would sell Sultan," Petra said bluntly, "if he thinks he can get away with it. If he can convince himself he's doing it for your own good, for the good of the marriage. Men are very good at justifying their actions when those actions serve their own interests." "He can't," I said, but even as I spoke, doubt crept in. "Sultan is registered in my name. The ownership papers are clear. Richard has no legal right to sell him." "And does your husband know that?" Petra asked. "Does he know about the registration, about the ownership papers, about the fact that Sultan is legally yours and yours alone?" I opened my mouth to say yes, then closed it again. Did Richard know? Had I ever explicitly told him about the registration, about the fact that I'd been meticulous about keeping Sultan's ownership separate from our marriage? I'd mentioned it, surely, but had Richard been paying attention? Did he know, or did he just assume that because we were married, what was mine was automatically his? "I need to check," I said, already pulling out my phone. "I need to make sure the papers are somewhere safe." The ownership documents were in a safety deposit box at my bank, along with my grandmother's jewelry and the other important papers I'd kept separate from Richard's access. But the thought that he might try to sell Sultan without legal authority sent ice through my veins. Because even if the sale wasn't legal, even if I could ultimately get Sultan back, the trauma of being sold, transported, potentially mistreated by someone who didn't know him, could damage him in ways that might take years to repair. "Listen to me," Petra said, her voice taking on that authoritative tone she used when teaching, the one that made students snap to attention. "You need to be smart about this. Don't confront your husband directly. Don't give him warning that you're taking precautions, but do take precautions. Make sure your ownership papers are secure. Make sure everyone here at the barn knows that under no circumstances is Sultan to leave with anyone but you. Talk to Margaret about it. She needs to know." "This is crazy," I said, but I was already thinking through the logistics, already planning. "This is my husband we're talking about. He wouldn't actually do something like that." "Would he?" Petra looked at me with something like pity in her sharp eyes. "I have been teaching for 40 years, she said. "I have seen good writers, talented writers, writers who could have competed at the highest levels, give up their horses because their husbands or boyfriends could not handle their success. I have seen horses sold out from under their owners by partners who claimed to know what was best. I have seen women made to choose between their passion and their relationships, and I have watched what happens to them when they choose the relationship. They become hollow. They become sad. They become ghosts of who they were meant to be." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with truth. I thought about the woman I'd been when I first bought Sultan, fresh off winning a regional championship on a borrowed horse, my grandmother's inheritance giving me the freedom to purchase the horse of my dreams. I'd been confident, joyful, full of plans and ambitions. When had that woman started to disappear? When had I started second-guessing myself, apologizing for taking up space, feeling guilty for having something that brought me joy? "I'll talk to Margaret," I said finally, my voice steadier now. "I'll make sure everyone knows, and I'll check the ownership papers, make sure everything is in order." "Good," Petra said. "And Andrea, you may need to make some difficult decisions soon, about your marriage, about your future. Start thinking about what you really want, what you're willing to accept, what you're not willing to sacrifice. Because I don't think your husband is going to let this go." After Petra left, I spent another hour with Sultan, grooming him until his coat gleamed, picking through his mane to remove every tangle, cleaning his hooves until they were spotless. The repetitive work was soothing, meditative, giving my racing mind something to focus on. Sultan dozed, enjoying the attention, occasionally turning his head to lip at my shoulder or blow softly into my hair. When I finally left the barn, the sun was high and hot, the September afternoon thick with humidity. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Richard and 2 text messages. The first message read, "Where are you? Why aren't you at work?" The second, "We need to talk tonight. Be home by 6. The commanding tone of the messages made my jaw clench. Not, "I'm worried about you," or "Are you okay?" But orders, expectations, the assumption that I would comply because that's what I always did. I thought about Petra's words, about the woman I used to be, about the choices I was facing. I drove to the bank, my hands tight on the steering wheel, and retrieved the ownership papers from the safety deposit box. The documents were exactly as I remembered. Sultan's registration with the United States Equestrian Federation listing me as sole owner, the bill of sale from 8 years ago showing that I'd purchased him with funds from my grandmother's estate, predating my marriage by 2 years. Everything was in order, everything was legal and clear. But I made copies anyway, multiple copies, and sent a scan to my email, to Margaret's email, and to my lawyer. Yes, I had a lawyer, a quiet woman named Jennifer Walsh, who'd helped me set up a separate account for my inheritance and had given me advice about keeping assets separate in marriage. Richard didn't know about Jennifer, didn't know that I'd been careful enough to seek legal counsel about protecting what was mine. I'd felt guilty about it at the time, like I was planning for the marriage to fail, but now I felt grateful for my past self's caution. Margaret met me at a coffee shop near the barn, a small place called the Grinding Stone that smelled like espresso and fresh pastries. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of tea steaming in front of her. Her face was grave as I sat down, and I realized that Petra must have already called her, must have filled her in on the situation. "Petra told me," Margaret confirmed, sliding one of the teacups toward me. The warmth felt good against my palms, even though I wasn't cold. The cafe was actually too warm, stuffy with afternoon heat and the press of bodies, but I held onto the cup anyway, needing something to do with my hands. "I've already talked to Tom and to the office staff. No one is to release Sultan to anyone but you. I've put it in writing and posted it on his stall. If your husband shows up, they're to call you immediately and stall him however they can." The matter-of-fact way she said it, the efficiency with which she'd moved to protect my horse, made my eyes burn with grateful tears. "Thank you," I managed to say. "I know this sounds paranoid. He's my husband. I should trust him. But Petra's right. I don't think he's going to let this go." "Trust your instincts," Margaret said firmly. "Women are taught to doubt themselves, to second-guess their gut feelings, especially about the men in their lives. But your instincts are telling you something's wrong, and you need to listen to them." We talked for another hour, Margaret sharing stories of other riders she'd known who'd faced similar situations, some who'd managed to preserve both their horses and their relationships, others who'd had to choose. The common thread in all the stories was that the partners who couldn't accept their spouse's passion, who saw it as competition rather than enhancement, those partners never changed. The relationships either ended, or the rider gave up the horse, and giving up the horse never actually fixed the underlying problems in the relationship. "At the end of the day," Margaret said, her dark eyes serious, "you have to decide what kind of life you want to live. Do you want to be with someone who supports you, who celebrates your successes, who understands that your happiness doesn't threaten his? Or are you willing to make yourself smaller, To give up the things you love, to live a narrower life in order to keep the peace. Because that's what you're looking at here. Richard isn't going to suddenly become supportive. He's shown you who he is. Believe him. I drove home with those words echoing in my mind, arriving at 6 o'clock exactly as Richard had commanded. His car was already in the garage, and I felt my stomach clench with familiar anxiety as I pulled in beside it. The house loomed before me, beautiful and expensive and empty of warmth, a showcase rather than a home. Richard was in the living room, sitting on our white leather sofa with a glass of scotch in his hand. The ice clinked against the crystal as he turned to look at me, and I could smell the sharp bite of alcohol from across the room. He'd changed out of his work suit into casual slacks and a polo shirt, looking relaxed and comfortable, but his eyes were hard. "Where were you today?" he asked without preamble. No hello, no, how are you feeling? Just the question delivered like an accusation. "I didn't feel well," I said, which was true enough. "I went to the barn for a while. Being with Sultan helps when I'm upset." "Upset about what?" Richard asked, taking a sip of his drink. The scotch was expensive, something he'd paid over $200 for, brought out for special occasions or difficult conversations. "Upset that I'm asking you to be reasonable? That I'm trying to help you see that your obsession with that horse is unhealthy?" "It's not an obsession," I said, trying to keep my voice level. I remained standing, not wanting to sit, feeling like I needed the option to move, to leave if this conversation went where I thought it might. "It's a passion. It's something I'm good at. Something I love. Why is that so threatening to you?" "It's not threatening," Richard said, but his voice had an edge that suggested otherwise. "It's just inappropriate. We're married, Andrea. We're supposed to be building a life together. But you're so focused on that horse that you barely have time for me. For us. For our friends. Do you know how many times I've had to make excuses for why you can't attend dinner parties or events because you have some horse show to go to?" 3 times, I said quietly. "In 6 years of marriage, I've missed 3 of your work events because of competitions. I've gone to dozens. I've smiled and made small talk with your colleagues and their wives. I've played the supportive spouse. But the 3 times I've asked you to support me, to come to my competitions, you've made me feel like I was being selfish for even asking." Richard's face flushed, anger mottling his cheeks. "That's not fair. My job is demanding. I can't just take off whenever I feel like it to watch you ride in circles." The dismissive way he said it, reducing dressage to riding in circles, made something snap inside me. "And my job isn't demanding? I work 40 hours a week too, Richard. I manage to balance work and riding, but you act like asking you to show up for me once in a while is this huge imposition." "Because it is!" Richard exploded, standing up so fast that scotch sloshed over the rim of his glass onto his hand. He didn't seem to notice. "Because I'm exhausted, Andrea. I'm working my ass off to provide for us, to build our future, and all you can think about is your next competition, your next training session, your next expensive vet bill. Do you have any idea what a burden that is? Do you have any idea how it feels to be married to someone who cares more about an animal than about me?" "That's not true," I said. But even as I spoke, I wondered if it was. Did I care more about Sultan than about Richard? Or had I just learned to find comfort and joy in the one relationship that didn't constantly demand I change who I was? "I care about you, but I need you to care about me too. About what matters to me. About who I am beyond being your wife." "I do care," Richard said, but his tone suggested he was just saying the words, going through the motions. "That's why I'm trying to help you see that this has gone too far. You need to sell the horse, Andrea. We need that money for our future, for the house we want to buy, for the children we're going to have eventually. You can't have a horse and be a mother. It's not practical." The mention of children hit me like cold water. We'd talked about having kids, vaguely, someday, but Richard had never seemed particularly interested in the topic. Now suddenly it was part of his argument for why I should give up Sultan. The manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. "We've never seriously discussed having children," I said. "You've told me multiple times that you're not ready, that your career has to come first, that maybe in 5 years or so we'll think about it. Now you're using hypothetical future children as a reason I should sell my horse?" "I'm using reality," Richard said coldly. "The reality that you're 33 years old, and if we're going to have kids, we need to start planning for it. And that planning includes making smart financial decisions. $200,000, Andrea. That's what you said the horse is worth. That's a college fund. That's a down payment on a better house. That's our future." "It's my horse," I said, my voice rising despite my attempts to stay calm. My heart was hammering against my ribs, my palms sweating. It's not our money. It's not our decision. Sultan is mine. The registration is in my name. I bought him with my inheritance before we were even married. You have no legal right to sell him. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. Richard's expression changed, something calculating entering his eyes, and I realized I'd just confirmed something he'd been wondering about. That Sultan was legally, completely mine. That he couldn't simply sell the horse and present it as a fait accompli. I see, Richard said slowly, setting down his glass with deliberate care. So that's how it is. You've made sure to keep him separate. Keep that money separate. Keep that part of your life completely walled off from me, from our marriage. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? Like you don't trust me. Like you're planning an exit strategy. I'm not planning an exit strategy, I said. But even as I spoke, I wondered if that was true. Had some part of me always known this marriage wasn't going to work? Had I kept Sultan separate not just to protect him, but to protect myself? I just wanted to keep something that was mine. Is that so wrong? In a marriage? Yes, Richard said flatly. In a marriage, you're supposed to share everything, but clearly you have a different definition of marriage than I do. He walked past me, close enough that I could smell the scotch on his breath, the expensive cologne, the anger radiating from him like heat. I have a business trip tomorrow, he said without looking at me. 3 days in Chicago. When I get back, I expect you to have made the right decision. Either the horse goes, or this marriage does. Your choice. He climbed the stairs to our bedroom, and I heard the door close firmly behind him. Not a slam, but deliberate. Final. I stood alone in the living room, my legs shaking, my mind racing. The ultimatum was clear. Sultan or Richard, my passion or my marriage. And I had 3 days to decide which one I was willing to lose. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me with its creaks and sighs. The air conditioning hummed steadily, keeping the temperature at exactly 70 degrees, the way Richard liked it, slightly too cold for me, but I'd learned not to complain about it. The sheets smelled like fabric softener, chemical and floral, nothing like the honest smell of horse and hay and leather that I craved. My mind raced through scenarios, through possibilities, through the life I'd built and the life I wanted, and the vast gulf between them. Richard left early the next morning before dawn, his suitcase wheels clicking across the hardwood floors, the garage door whirring open and then closed again. I heard his car pull away and felt my entire body relax. Tension I hadn't realized I was holding draining away like water. The relief was so profound it was almost shameful. What did it say about my marriage that I felt nothing but blessed relief when my husband left for a business trip? I called in sick to work again, knowing I was probably going to have a difficult conversation with my boss at some point, but unable to care about anything beyond the immediate crisis. Work felt distant and unimportant. My job as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized tech company suddenly seeming like just another thing I did to make other people happy, another role I played that had nothing to do with who I actually was. At the barn, the morning air was cool and slightly damp, fog still clinging to the low areas of the pastures, burning off slowly as the sun rose higher. Sultan whinnied when he saw me coming, that loud, demanding sound he made when he thought breakfast was taking too long. The normal sound, the everyday interaction, made my throat tight with emotion. How could Richard ask me to give this up? How could he not understand that Sultan wasn't just a hobby or a possession, but a relationship, a partnership, a living being who depended on me and who I depended on in return? I brought Sultan in from his turnout paddock, his coat damp with morning dew, small bits of grass and mud clinging to his legs. He walked beside me with his characteristic grace, his head lowered to my shoulder, completely trusting. In the cross ties, I groomed him slowly, methodically, the brush moving in smooth circles over his coat, finding the spots he liked best, behind his withers and under his mane, where he would stretch his neck out and wiggle his upper lip in pleasure. "What am I going to do?" I asked him softly, and he turned his head to look at me with one large, dark eye, that knowing look horses have that makes you believe they understand everything you're saying. "I can't lose you. But I can't stay in a marriage that makes me this unhappy either. When did it get so bad? When did I stop recognizing my own life? Talking to yourself now?" The voice was male, amused, and I turned to see Jake Crawford leaning against the barn doorway, coffee cup in hand, that easy smile on his face that he seemed to wear perpetually. Jake was a farrier who worked out of Riverside. shoeing most of the horses in the barn, including Sultan. He was maybe 40, weathered and muscular from years of physical work, with laugh lines around his eyes and hands that were scarred and calloused and impossibly gentle with nervous horses. "Just having a deep conversation with my therapist here," I said, trying for lightness even though I knew my eyes were probably red from lack of sleep and crying. "He's a very good listener, doesn't judge, excellent at keeping secrets." Jake walked closer, his boots making soft thuds on the barn aisle. He smelled like coffee and leather and horses, that familiar combination that meant safety and normalcy. "I heard you've been having some trouble," he said carefully. "Margaret mentioned you might need some extra eyes on Sultan. Made sure I understood he doesn't leave this property with anyone but you." Word traveled fast in the barn community, apparently, but instead of feeling exposed, I felt grateful. These people, this community, they were protecting what mattered to me when the person who was supposed to do that was actively trying to take it away. "My husband wants me to sell him," I said bluntly, too tired to soften it or explain it gently. "Says I'm spending too much money, that I need to grow up, that it's him or the horse." Jake was quiet for a moment, taking a sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "I've been shoeing horses for 20 years, he said finally. "And I've seen a lot of marriages come and go. You know what I've learned? The partners who can't handle their spouse having something they're passionate about, something that makes them happy, those partners aren't worried about the time or the money. They're worried about the fact that their spouse doesn't need them for everything. They're worried about not being the center of the universe." It was essentially what Petra and Margaret had said, but hearing it from Jake, from a man's perspective, somehow made it feel more valid. "But isn't marriage supposed to be about compromise?" I asked. "About making sacrifices for each other?" "Sure," Jake agreed. "But compromise goes both ways. And sacrifice shouldn't mean giving up the things that make you who you are." My ex-wife wanted me to quit shoeing horses, said it was too hard on my body, that I should get a desk job, make more money, be more ambitious. But shoeing horses is what I love. It's who I am. I tried to explain that to her, tried to get her to understand, but she just kept pushing. Eventually, I had to choose between my work and my marriage. "What did you choose?" I asked, though I could already guess from the way he said ex-wife. "My work," Jake said simply. And I know that sounds selfish, but here's the thing. After the divorce, I realized I'd been miserable for years. I'd been trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to fit into her idea of what I should be. When I finally let go of that, when I finally gave myself permission to just be who I actually am, I was happier than I'd been in a decade. Single, financially worse off, but happier. He finished his coffee and tossed the cup into the trash bin near the tack room. "I'm not saying you should get divorced," he said. "That's your decision to make. But I am saying that you shouldn't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Sultan is a good horse. You're a good rider. You have something special together, and that's worth protecting." After Jake left to shoe horses in another barn, I tacked Sultan up and rode, losing myself in the familiar movements, the communication between horse and rider that happened through pressure and release, through shifts in weight and breath. We worked through our competition test, the movements flowing together now with a precision that felt almost magical. Sultan responding to the lightest cues, anticipating what I wanted almost before I asked for it. Petra appeared halfway through my ride, watching silently from the arena rail. When I brought Sultan to a halt, she was smiling, one of her rare genuine smiles that transformed her usually stern face. "That was beautiful," she said simply. "You two are ready. More than ready. This could be your year for nationals, Andrea. I truly believe that." The praise should have filled me with joy, but instead it just made my chest ache with the unfairness of it all. "What if I can't compete?" I asked, my voice small. "What if I have to choose Richard and give up Sultan? All this work, all this training for nothing?" Petra's expression hardened. "Then you will have chosen poorly," she said bluntly, "and you will spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been. But Andrea, listen to me. I have watched you grow as a rider over the past 8 years. When you first came to me, you were good, but tentative, always second-guessing yourself, always asking permission. Now you are confident. You trust yourself. You trust Sultan. You ride like you deserve to be in the arena. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how many riders never develop that kind of presence?" I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak around the lump in my throat. "Your husband, he wants to take that away from you," Petra continued. "Not because he needs the money, not because he doesn't have time with you, but because when you are here, when you are riding, You are powerful. You are complete. You don't need him, and that terrifies him. So he tells you that you must choose, hoping that you will choose him and then spend the rest of your life being grateful that he let you stay. The accuracy of her assessment took my breath away. That was exactly what Richard wanted, wasn't it? For me to give up Sultan, to prove my devotion to him, to demonstrate that he mattered more than my own happiness. And then he would have won, would have proven that he controlled me, that I would make myself smaller to fit into his life. I can't give him up, I whispered. I can't give up Sultan. I know that makes me a terrible wife, but I just can't. It doesn't make you a terrible wife, Petra said firmly. It makes you a person who knows her own worth. Now you just need to be brave enough to act on that knowledge. The next 2 days passed in a strange limbo. I went to work, did my job mechanically, came home to the empty house that felt more like a hotel than a home. I spent every spare moment at the barn, riding Sultan, caring for him, talking to the other boarders who all seemed to know what was happening and who offered support in small ways, a kind word, a shared coffee, an offer to help with chores. Margaret checked in daily, making sure I was okay, reminding me that I wasn't alone, that I had people who cared about me. I spoke to Jennifer, my lawyer, laying out the situation. She was calm and professional, explaining my rights, the fact that Sultan was separate property, that Richard had no legal claim to him. But she also warned me that divorce was messy, that Richard would likely fight, that he made more money than I did and could afford better lawyers if it came to that. She told me to start documenting everything, to open a separate bank account, to be prepared for the possibility that this marriage was ending whether I was ready for it or not. The thought of divorce felt huge and terrifying and also, strangely, like relief. Like a door opening in a room I'd thought had no exits. On the third evening, Richard came home. I heard his car pull into the garage, heard the door open and close, heard his footsteps in the house. He found me in the kitchen, where I'd been mechanically preparing dinner, going through the motions of being a wife even though my heart wasn't in it. "Andrea," he said, and his voice was softer than it had been before he left, almost gentle. "Can we talk?" We sat at the kitchen table, the dinner I'd made cooling on the counter, untouched. Richard looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered, his shoulders slightly slumped. For a moment, he looked like the man I'd fallen in love with, the one who'd seemed charming and successful and stable, who'd made me feel safe after a series of failed relationships. "I've been thinking a lot this week," he said, his hands wrapped around a glass of water, condensation dripping onto the table. "About us, about what I said before I left, about the ultimatum I gave you." Hope flickered in my chest, tentative and fragile. Maybe he'd realized how unfair he was being. Maybe he'd come to understand how important Sultan was to me. Maybe we could find a compromise, a way forward that didn't require me to sacrifice the thing I loved most. "I was harsh," Richard continued. "I know that, and I'm sorry for the way I said things. But Andrea, my feelings haven't changed. I still think the horse has to go. I think it's what's best for us, for our marriage, for our future, and I hope you've realized that too." The hope died as quickly as it had sparked. Of course he hadn't changed his mind. He was just trying a different approach, softer manipulation instead of hard ultimatum. I could see it in his eyes, the expectation that I would fold, that I would choose him, that I would be a good wife and do what he wanted. "I can't," I said quietly. "I can't sell Sultan. I'm sorry, Richard, but I just can't do it." His expression hardened, the mask of gentleness slipping away. "Can't or won't?" "Both," I said, and saying it out loud felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and liberating at once. "I won't sell Sultan because I love him and he's mine, and you have no right to ask me to. And I can't sell him because doing so would kill something essential in me, and I don't think I would survive it." Richard stood up abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "So that's it then. You're choosing a horse over me, over our marriage, over everything we've built together. You're the one making me choose," I said, standing as well, facing him across the table. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. "You're the one who can't accept that I have something in my life that doesn't revolve around you. I'm not choosing Sultan over you, Richard. I'm choosing myself. I'm choosing not to give up the things that make me happy just because you're uncomfortable with them." "This is insane," Richard said, his voice rising. "You're throwing away our marriage for an animal. Do you hear yourself? Do you hear how crazy that sounds?" "What's crazy?" I said, my own voice rising to match his, "is that you think asking me to sacrifice everything I love is reasonable. What's crazy is that you've spent our entire marriage trying to make me smaller, quieter, less than who I am. What's crazy is that I let you do it for so long." The words hung between us, true and terrible. Richard's face was flushed, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a moment, I thought he might actually hit me, and I took an involuntary step back. But he just stared at me, breathing hard, his jaw working. "Fine," he said finally, his voice cold and flat. "If that's how you want it, fine. But don't come crying to me when you realize what you've given up. Don't come back when you're alone, and that horse doesn't keep you warm at night." He left the kitchen, and I heard him go upstairs, heard drawers opening and closing, the sounds of him packing. My legs felt weak, and I sat down heavily, my hands shaking. Had I just ended my marriage? The thought was enormous, too big to fully process. But underneath the fear and sadness was something else, something that felt almost like peace. Richard came back downstairs with a suitcase, dressed now in casual clothes rather than his work attire. "I'm going to stay at the Marriott downtown," he said stiffly. "I'll have my lawyer contact you about separation proceedings." "I assume you'll want to get your own lawyer." "I already have one," I said, and saw surprise flicker across his face. He'd underestimated me, hadn't expected me to have taken steps to protect myself. Good. Let him be surprised. Let him realize I wasn't as helpless as he'd thought. After he left, I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the house settle around me, feeling the weight of what had just happened. My marriage was over. 6 years, dissolved in a single conversation. I should have felt devastated, should have been crying, should have been wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. Instead, I felt light, free, like I could finally breathe fully for the first time in years. I called Margaret, and she answered on the first ring. "It's done," I said simply. "He's gone. We're separating." "Oh, honey," Margaret said, her voice full of compassion. "How are you doing? Are you okay?" "I think so," I said, and was surprised to realize it was true. "I think I'm actually okay. Better than okay, maybe." "Is that weird?" "Not weird at all," Margaret assured me. "Sometimes the end of something that wasn't working feels like relief more than grief. That's normal. That's healthy." We talked for a while longer, and Margaret made me promise to come by her house the next day, that she wasn't letting me be alone to spiral. After I hung up, I drove to the barn, needing to see Sultan, needing to reassure myself that I'd made the right choice. The barn was quiet in the evening, most of the boarders gone home for the day, just the night lights on and the soft sounds of horses settling in for the night. Sultan was dozing in his stall, but he perked up when he heard me coming, nickering softly. I let myself in and wrapped my arms around his neck, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling his warmth, his solidity, his realness. "It's going to be okay," I whispered to him. "I chose you. I chose us. And we're going to be okay." He blew softly into my hair, and I let myself believe it was agreement, was comfort, was understanding. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the logistics of separation and divorce, the financial implications, the social fallout. But tonight, I had Sultan, and I had my freedom, and that was enough. I didn't know, couldn't have known, that Richard wasn't done yet, that his anger and wounded pride were festering, turning into something uglier, something that would drive him to actions I never could have anticipated. That while I stood in Sultan's stall feeling relief and hope, Richard was in his hotel room making phone calls, forming a plan that would shatter my newfound peace and turn my life into a nightmare. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of September day that promised the best of early fall. Warm but not hot, the air crisp and clean. I woke feeling more rested than I had in months, despite the massive upheaval of my life. The house was mine, at least for now. Quiet and peaceful without Richard's presence filling every corner with tension. I had the day off work, had called in and finally had an honest conversation with my boss about what was happening, about needing some time to sort out my personal life. She'd been surprisingly understanding, had told me to take the rest of the week, that my job would be there when I was ready to come back. The kindness had made me tearful, reminded me that there were good people in the world, people who cared about more than just productivity and appearances. I planned to spend the day at the barn, maybe take Sultan on a trail ride, something relaxing and fun after the intensity of the past week. I was just finishing my coffee when my phone rang. Margaret's name on the caller ID. I answered with a smile, ready to confirm what time I'd come by her house later. "Andrea." Margaret's voice was tight, strained, wrong somehow. My stomach dropped before she even continued. You need to get to the barn right now. There's a problem." "What kind of problem?" I asked, already moving, already grabbing my keys, my heart starting to pound. "Just get here," Margaret said, "as fast as you can." I drove too fast, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white, my mind racing through possibilities. Was Sultan hurt? Had there been an accident? Was he sick? The 15-minute drive felt like hours, every red light an agony, every slow driver an obstacle I wanted to scream at. The barn parking lot was more crowded than it should have been for a weekday morning. I recognized most of the cars, regular boarders and staff, but there was also a large horse trailer I didn't recognize, a commercial rig with a company name painted on the side. And near the barn entrance, a cluster of people, at least 20, standing in a tight group, their body language tense and unhappy. I parked haphazardly and ran toward them, my heart in my throat. As I got closer, I could see Margaret at the center of the group, and Petra and Tom, and most of the regular riders from the club. They were facing someone, blocking the barn entrance, and as I pushed through the crowd, I saw who? Richard. He stood with his arms crossed, his expression set and determined, and beside him was a man I didn't know, young and muscular, wearing jeans and work boots and a shirt with the same logo as the trailer. A horse hauler. Richard had brought a horse hauler to the barn. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice loud and harsh, cutting through the murmur of voices. Everyone turned to look at me, and I saw relief on Margaret's face, anger on Petra's, and something almost like satisfaction on Richard's. "Andrea," he said, and his voice was calm, reasonable, the tone he used in business meetings when he wanted to appear in control. "I tried to do this the easy way. I tried to give you a chance to make the right decision. But since you refused, I'm handling it myself." "Handling what?" I asked. But I already knew, already felt the cold dread spreading through my chest like ice water. "Richard, what did you do?" "I sold Sultan," Richard said simply. "Found a buyer who's willing to pay fair market value. The hauler is here to pick him up. It's already done, Andrea. The paperwork is signed." The world tilted sideways, and for a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what Richard had just said. My vision tunneled, edges going dark, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, taste it, coppery and metallic. The morning sun felt too bright, the voices around me too loud, everything sharp and overwhelming and wrong. "You can't," I managed to say, my voice coming out strangled and thin. "You can't sell him. He's not yours to sell. He's community property," Richard said, and I could hear the smugness in his voice, the satisfaction of someone who thinks they've won. "We're married. What's yours is mine. I have every legal right to sell assets that belong to our marital estate." "That's not how it works," Margaret said sharply, stepping forward. Her face was flushed with anger, her small frame vibrating with barely contained fury. "Sultan was Andrea's before you married. He's separate property. You have no legal claim to him whatsoever." "That's for the courts to decide," Richard said dismissively. "In the meantime, I've found a buyer who's willing to take him off our hands. The money will go into our joint account, and we can settle the details later during the divorce proceedings." The horse hauler shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the tension, clearly realizing he'd walked into the middle of something much more complicated than a simple horse sale. "Look, man," he said to Richard, "if there's some kind of dispute about ownership, I can't just take the horse. I need clear title. That's how this works." "There's no dispute," Richard said firmly. "I have a bill of sale right here, signed by me as the legal husband and co-owner. That's sufficient." "It's absolutely not sufficient," Petra said, her accent thickening with anger. "That paper is worthless. This man does not own this horse. He has forged documents to sell property that does not belong to him. That is theft. That is fraud. And if you load that horse onto your trailer, you become an accomplice to a crime." The hauler's eyes widened, and he took a step back, holding up his hands. "Whoa, hold on. I don't want any part of fraud. I'm just hired to transport horses. If there's a question about ownership, I'm out. I'm not risking my license over this." "There's no question," Richard insisted, but I could see desperation starting to creep into his expression now, could see his plan falling apart. "I'm telling you, I have the legal right." "Show us the registration papers," I interrupted, my voice stronger now, adrenaline cutting through the shock and fear. "Sultan is registered with the USEF. The registration lists the legal owner. Show us that paperwork, Richard. Show everyone here that your name appears anywhere on Sultan's documentation." Richard's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking near his temple. "I don't have to prove anything to you people. This is a private matter between my wife and me, made very public by you bringing a commercial hauler to a barn with 20 witnesses," Tom pointed out dryly. He'd been quiet until now, but he stepped forward, his weathered face set in hard lines. "And for the record, I'm the barn manager here, and I've been given explicit written instructions that this horse does not leave the property with anyone except Andrea. So even if you had legal ownership, which you don't, you're not loading him onto that trailer." "I'll call the police," Richard threatened. "I'll have you arrested for interfering with the sale of my property." "Please do call the police," Margaret said, pulling out her own phone. "In fact, I'm calling them right now, because what you're attempting to do is illegal seizure of property and possibly grand theft depending on how the law defines it. Sultan is worth over $200,000. That makes this a felony." I watched Richard's face change as the reality of what Margaret was saying sank in. He'd been so focused on his wounded pride, on punishing me for choosing Sultan over him, that he hadn't actually thought through the legal consequences of what he was attempting. Or maybe he'd thought I wouldn't fight back, that I'd be too intimidated or upset to stand up to him. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction now. "You wouldn't actually press charges against your own husband." "Ex-husband," I corrected, and saying it out loud felt powerful, felt right. "We're separated, Richard. And yes, I absolutely would press charges. You're attempting to steal my horse. That's a crime. And all these people here are witnesses to your attempted theft." The crowd around us murmured agreement, a low rumble of support that made my throat tight with gratitude. These people, this community, they had my back. They'd shown up, formed a physical barrier between Richard and the barn, protected Sultan when I couldn't be there to do it myself. Sarah, a young rider who usually kept to herself, suddenly spoke up. "I recorded the whole thing," she said, holding up her phone. "Everything you said, about selling the horse, about having paperwork signed, it's all on video, with timestamps and everything." Richard's face went pale, then red, anger and humiliation warring for dominance. "You're all insane," he spat out. "This is just a horse. It's not worth destroying a marriage over. It's not worth all this drama. Andrea, for God's sake, be reasonable. Tell these people to back down and let's settle this like adults." "I am being reasonable," I said, and I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded, how steady I felt, despite the fact that my hands were shaking and my heart was still racing. "You're the one who brought a horse hauler to steal my property. You're the one who forged a bill of sale. You're the one who's committed a crime here, Richard. Not me. Not any of these people who are protecting what's mine." Margaret had her phone to her ear now, speaking calmly but firmly to whoever had answered. "Yes, I need to report an attempted theft. No, the perpetrator is still on the property. He's attempting to remove a horse valued at over $200,000 without the owner's permission. Yes, we have multiple witnesses. No, we're not letting him take the horse. We're keeping him here until the police arrive." Richard looked at the hauler, who was already backing toward his truck, clearly wanting no part of whatever was about to happen. "Where are you going?" Richard demanded. "I paid you to transport a horse. That's your job." "Not without clear title, man," the hauler said, climbing into his truck. "This is way above my pay grade. You people work out your ownership issues, and if you still need a hauler, call me back. But I'm not touching this situation with a 10-foot pole." The truck and trailer pulled away, leaving Richard standing alone facing a wall of angry riders and staff. He looked smaller suddenly, diminished, his expensive clothes and confident demeanor unable to shield him from the reality that he'd miscalculated badly. "This isn't over," he said, but it sounded like bluster now, like a child threatening consequences he couldn't actually enforce. "I'll get a lawyer. I'll prove I have rights to that horse. I'll make sure you don't see a penny of his sale value in the divorce." "Good luck with that," I said quietly. "Sultan's registration is in my name. The purchase was made with my inheritance, documented and traced to my grandmother's estate. I have a lawyer who specializes in equestrian law, and she's already reviewed all the documentation. You have no case, Richard. You never did. This was just you trying to hurt me, trying to punish me for not doing what you wanted." The sound of sirens in the distance made everyone tense. Richard's eyes darted toward the road, and I could see him calculating, trying to decide if he should leave before the police arrived or stay and try to talk his way out of this. He chose the former, turning and walking quickly toward his car. "I wouldn't leave if I were you," Tom called after him. "That looks like fleeing the scene. That's not going to help your case." Richard hesitated, his hand on his car door, then seemed to deflate. He leaned against the Mercedes, his shoulders slumping, waiting. 2 sheriff's deputies pulled into the parking lot minutes later, and the crowd of riders parted to let them through. The next hour was a blur of statements and explanations. Margaret was remarkably organized, presenting the deputies with copies of Sultan's registration, the barn's written policy about who could remove horses, the video Sarah had taken on her phone. I showed them the ownership documents I'd brought from the bank, explained about my inheritance, about Richard's ultimatum, about waking up to find him trying to steal my horse. Richard tried to present his side, claiming community property rights, insisting he was just trying to make a sound financial decision for the marriage. But the deputies weren't buying it, especially after they looked up Sultan's registration and confirmed that Richard's name appeared nowhere on any official documentation. "Mr. Thornton?" one of the deputies said, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense expression. "What you've attempted to do here constitutes attempted grand theft. The horse in question is valued at over $200,000 and is clearly registered to your wife as separate property. You had no legal right to attempt to sell it." "We're married," Richard protested. "Community property laws don't apply to property acquired before marriage or through inheritance," the deputy interrupted. "And even if they did, you can't unilaterally sell major assets without your spouse's agreement. That's not how marital property works." "Are you arresting me?" Richard asked, his voice tight with barely suppressed panic. I could see sweat beading on his forehead, could see the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. The deputy looked at me. "That's up to Mrs. Thornton. Does she want to press charges?" Everyone was looking at me now, waiting. Richard's eyes met mine, and I could see fear there. Real fear. Probably for the first time since I'd known him. He was realizing the consequences of his actions, realizing that I wasn't going to back down, wasn't going to protect him from what he'd done. I thought about it, really thought about it. Pressing charges would mean Richard would have a criminal record. It would affect his job, his reputation, his future. It would make the divorce even uglier than it was already going to be. Part of me, the part that had been trained to be a good wife, to keep the peace, to smooth things over, wanted to say no, wanted to let him off with a warning, wanted to just make this all go away. But another part of me, the part that was tired of being small, tired of accommodating, tired of letting people hurt me without consequences, that part wanted justice, wanted Richard to understand that actions had consequences, that you couldn't just steal someone's property because you were angry, that being a husband didn't give you ownership over your wife's life. "Yes," I said finally, and my voice didn't shake at all. "Yes, I want to press charges. He attempted to steal my horse. That's a crime, and I want it on record." Richard's face crumpled, a mixture of shock and disbelief and rage. "Andrea, don't do this. Think about what this will do to me, to my career. Think about what people will say." "I'm thinking about what you tried to do to me," I said quietly. "I'm thinking about the fact that you brought a horse hauler to steal Sultan because I wouldn't do what you wanted. I'm thinking about the fact that you've spent our entire marriage trying to control me. And when that didn't work anymore, you tried to destroy the thing I love most. So yes, Richard, I'm pressing charges." The deputy nodded, pulled out handcuffs, and I watched as she read Richard his rights and placed his hands behind his back. He was still protesting, still trying to argue, his voice rising in pitch and volume as she led him to the patrol car. The sound of the car door closing was final, definitive, the end of something. The other deputies stayed behind to finish taking statements, collecting contact information from everyone who'd witnessed what had happened. The crowd of riders had grown quiet now, the adrenaline of the confrontation wearing off, leaving everyone looking slightly shell-shocked. After the deputies left, after Richard was driven away to be booked and processed, I finally allowed myself to go into the barn, to Sultan's stall, needing to see him, to touch him, to reassure myself that he was still here, still safe, still mine. He was standing by his hay net, calmly pulling mouthfuls of Timothy and chewing slowly, completely unbothered by the drama that had unfolded outside. When I opened his stall door, he turned his head toward me, ears forward, that soft expression in his eyes that meant he was content, comfortable, happy. I wrapped my arms around his neck and started to cry, really cry, the kind of deep, wrenching sobs that come from releasing months or maybe years of tension and fear and sadness. Sultan stood still, patient as always, occasionally turning his head to lip gently at my shoulder or blow softly into my hair. His solid warmth, his familiar scent, his steady presence, it all anchored me, reminded me why I'd fought, why I'd chosen him, why this mattered so much. "You're safe," I whispered to him when I could finally speak. "You're safe, and you're mine, and no one is taking you away. I promise. I promise I'll always protect you. Margaret appeared at the stall door, her face soft with compassion. How are you holding up? She asked gently. I don't know, I admitted. I just had my husband arrested. I'm getting divorced. My life is completely falling apart, but somehow I feel okay. Is that crazy? Not crazy, Margaret assured me. She came into the stall and stood beside me, one hand on Sultan's shoulder, providing support through proximity. You stood up for yourself. You protected what matters to you. That takes tremendous courage, Andrea. You should be proud of yourself. I'm scared, I confessed. Richard has money for good lawyers. He's going to fight me on everything. The house, the finances, maybe even try again to claim Sultan. I don't know if I can afford the legal battle he's going to wage. You're not alone in this, Margaret said firmly. You have this whole community behind you, and more importantly, you have the law on your side. Sultan is clearly unequivocally yours. Any judge is going to see that within 5 minutes of looking at the documentation. Petra appeared next, pushing into the stall with her characteristic lack of regard for personal space. I have been on the phone, she announced. I called my lawyer, and I called the head of the USEF disciplinary committee. What your husband tried to do, attempting to sell a registered horse without the owner's consent, that is a serious matter in the equestrian community. If word gets out, and it will get out, Richard will be blacklisted. No one will do business with him in this industry. His reputation is ruined. The vindictive satisfaction in Petra's voice should have made me uncomfortable, but instead I felt grateful. These women were going to war for me, using every resource they had to protect me and Sultan. I'd spent so much of my marriage feeling isolated, feeling like I had to handle everything alone, that having people actively fighting on my behalf felt almost overwhelming. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Both of you. All of you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here. You would have fought anyway, Margaret said with certainty. You're stronger than you think, Andrea. Today proved that. The rest of the day passed in a strange fog. Riders kept stopping by Sultan's stall, offering words of support, sharing their own stories of difficult relationships, of choosing their horses over unsupportive partners, of the freedom that came with prioritizing their own happiness. Sarah, who'd recorded everything on her phone, had already posted about it on the barn's private Facebook group, and my phone kept buzzing with messages of support from people I barely knew. Jake, the farrier, showed up with dinner from a local barbecue place, insisting I needed to eat something, that I looked like I was about to pass out. We ate together in the barn office, the food tasting like cardboard in my mouth but the company comforting. He told me more about his divorce, about the guilt and relief that came with it, about how hard the first year was, but how much better everything got after that. You're going to be okay, he told me as the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It doesn't feel like it now, but you are. You made the hard choice, the right choice. Now you just have to get through the messy part. I went home late that evening, exhausted in every possible way, emotionally and physically wrung out. The house felt different now, less oppressive, more like a space I was occupying temporarily rather than a prison. I knew I'd probably have to sell it in the divorce, that Richard would fight for his share and I couldn't afford to buy him out, but somehow that didn't bother me as much as it should have. It was just a house, just walls and floors and fancy finishes. It had never been a home, not really. My phone rang as I was getting ready for bed, and I saw Jennifer, my lawyer's name on the screen. I answered with trepidation, expecting bad news, expecting her to tell me that Richard had already filed something, had already started the legal battle I was dreading. I heard about what happened today, Jennifer said without preamble. The sheriff's department contacted me as they had me listed as your attorney in their records. Are you all right? I think so, I said. Scared mostly. Richard's going to come after me hard for this. Actually, Jennifer said, and there was something almost gleeful in her tone. I don't think he is. Or rather, he might try. But he's not going to get anywhere. Andrea, attempting to steal a horse worth over $200,000 is a Class 4 felony in Virginia. If he's convicted, he could face up to 10 years in prison, though more likely he'll get probation and fines for a first offense. But here's the important part. His legal troubles give us tremendous leverage in the divorce proceedings. What do you mean? I asked, sinking down onto my bed, trying to follow what she was saying through the exhaustion. I mean that Richard is currently facing criminal charges for attempting to steal your property, Jennifer explained. That's documented, witnessed by multiple people, recorded on video. When we go before a divorce judge, that fact is going to carry a lot of weight. It demonstrates that Richard has no respect for your property rights, that he's willing to commit crimes to get what he wants, that he can't be trusted to act in good faith. Any judge is going to take that into consideration when dividing assets. Hope flickered in my chest, tentative but real. So you think I can keep Sultan? That Richard won't be able to claim any right to him? I think Sultan was never at risk, Jennifer said firmly. The registration, the bill of sale, the paper trail from your inheritance, it's all crystal clear. Richard never had a legal leg to stand on, and now he's facing criminal charges for trying anyway. But more than that, I think we can use this to negotiate a favorable settlement overall. Richard is going to want to make this go away quickly, quietly, before it affects his job any more than it already has. We can use that. We talked for another 30 minutes, Jennifer laying out strategy, explaining what would happen next, preparing me for the process ahead. When I finally hung up, I felt more hopeful than I had in weeks. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be difficult times ahead, but for the first time I could see a path forward, a life beyond Richard, a future where I was free. I slept that night better than I had in months, deeply and dreamlessly, my body finally releasing the tension it had been holding for so long. I woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of birds singing, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt genuinely happy. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and paperwork and difficult conversations. Richard was released on bail, ordered to stay away from me and from the barn, fitted with an ankle monitor to ensure compliance. The story spread through our social circles, through Richard's work, through the tight-knit equestrian community. People took sides, some supporting Richard's version of events where he was just a concerned husband trying to help his irrational wife, but most seeing the situation for what it was, a controlling man trying to punish his wife for having the audacity to choose herself. Richard's lawyer reached out to Jennifer with a settlement offer within 2 weeks. He would agree to a no-fault divorce, wouldn't fight the division of assets, would acknowledge Sultan as my separate property, would accept a reasonable split of the marital home's equity. In exchange, I would agree not to pursue the maximum penalties for the criminal charges, would write a letter to the prosecutor asking for leniency, would not speak publicly about what had happened. "What do you think?" Jennifer asked me when she presented the offer. "It's a good deal, honestly. You keep Sultan, you get your share of the house, and you avoid a long, expensive legal battle. The downside is that Richard gets off relatively easy on the criminal charges." I thought about it. Really thought about it. Part of me wanted to push for maximum penalties, wanted Richard to face real consequences for what he'd tried to do. But another part of me just wanted it to be over. Wanted to move forward with my life, wanted to focus on Sultan and competition season and rebuilding my life rather than staying mired in anger and revenge. "I'll take it," I said finally, "on one condition. I want a restraining order that explicitly states Richard is not allowed within 500 feet of any property where Sultan is kept, not allowed to contact me about Sultan in any way, and that if he violates that order, the original charges are reinstated in full. I want legal protection that this never happens again." Jennifer smiled, that sharp, satisfied smile of a lawyer who knows she's about to win. "I can get that written into the agreement. Good thinking, Andrea. You're protecting yourself and your horse, which is exactly what you should be doing." The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later, remarkably fast by legal standards, pushed through by Richard's desire to make it all go away before it caused more damage to his career. I walked out of the courthouse a single woman, with sole ownership of Sultan, a decent settlement that would tide me over while I figured out what came next, and a restraining order that gave me legal protection against any future attempts to interfere with my life. It should have felt triumphant, and in some ways it did, but mostly it just felt like relief, like setting down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. The regional championships were 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, held at a sprawling equestrian center 2 hours south of Riverside. The facility was impressive, with multiple arenas, pristine footing, and temporary stabling that smelled of fresh shavings and nervous horses. The air hummed with energy, riders warming up their mounts, trainers shouting instructions, spectators gathering along the rail to watch the competition unfold. I'd arrived the day before, giving Sultan time to settle into his temporary stall, to adjust to the new surroundings, to shake off the travel and relax. He'd been perfect during the trailering, loading calmly, standing quietly during the drive, unloading with his usual grace and confidence. Some horses fell apart at competitions, stressed by the change in routine, overwhelmed by the chaos and noise. Sultan seemed to thrive on it, his ears forward with interest, his body language alert but relaxed. Margaret had driven down with me, her truck pulling my smaller 2-horse trailer with practiced ease. She'd insisted on coming, on being there to support me, and I was grateful for her presence in a way I couldn't fully articulate. The barn community had rallied around me in the weeks since Richard's arrest, but Margaret especially had become something like a mentor, a friend, a mother figure all rolled into one. "How are you feeling?" she asked as we walked the competition grounds together that evening, watching other riders school their horses, getting a feel for the atmosphere. "Nervous," I admitted. The butterflies in my stomach had been there all day, that familiar pre-competition anxiety that made food taste like cardboard and sleep feel impossible. But good nervous, excited nervous, not scared nervous, if that makes sense. "It makes perfect sense," Margaret said. She was eating an apple, the crisp sound of her bites punctuating our conversation. "You're ready for this. You and Sultan have put in the work. You belong here." We passed the main competition arena where tomorrow's tests would be held, the white fence boards gleaming in the evening light, the judges' boxes positioned at precise intervals. I tried to imagine myself riding in there, Sultan moving beneath me with that powerful grace, executing the movements we'd practiced hundreds of times. The image felt both thrilling and terrifying. That night in my hotel room, I couldn't sleep despite my exhaustion. I kept thinking about Richard, about how he would have made this competition about him somehow, would have found reasons to complain about the time away from home, the money spent on the entry fees, the inconvenience of it all. The fact that he wasn't here, wasn't draining my joy with his disapproval, felt liberating in a way that still surprised me. I thought about calling someone, reaching out for reassurance, but it was late and everyone was probably asleep. Instead, I pulled out my phone and looked at photos of Sultan, the hundreds of pictures I'd taken over the years. Sultan as a 5-year-old, fresh off the trailer from Germany, all legs and promise. Sultan at our first show together, both of us nervous but determined. Sultan at training sessions with Petra, his muscles defined and powerful, moving with the kind of presence that made people stop and stare. This horse, this magnificent creature, had been the catalyst for everything that had happened. Losing him would have broken something essential in me, would have taught me that my needs and wants and passions were negotiable, disposable, less important than keeping the peace. Choosing him, fighting for him, had taught me something entirely different. That I was worth fighting for, that my happiness mattered, that I didn't have to make myself small to deserve love and respect. I finally fell asleep around 2 a.m, my phone still clutched in my hand, Sultan's image on the screen. The alarm went off at 5, dragging me from restless dreams into gray pre-dawn light. My body ached with exhaustion, my head fuzzy, but adrenaline kicked in the moment I remembered where I was and what I was doing today. Competition day, regional championships, everything Sultan and I had been working toward. I dressed in layers, knowing I'd need warm clothes for the early morning chill that would give way to heat as the day progressed. At the stables, Sultan was already awake, nickering softly when he heard my footsteps. I gave him his breakfast grain, checked his legs for any heat or swelling, ran my hands over every inch of him looking for problems that weren't there. He was sound, healthy, ready. Petra arrived at 6:30, carrying coffee and pastries that I tried to eat but mostly just pushed around on a paper plate. She watched me critically, taking in the dark circles under my eyes, the nervous energy making my hands shake slightly. "Did you sleep?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Some," I lied. "Enough." Petra said, skeptical. "Well, it doesn't matter now. When you get on that horse, when you enter that arena, all that matters is the connection between you and Sultan. Everything else falls away. You know this. You've done this before. Not at this level," I said. "Not at regionals. Not with this much riding on it." "Nothing is riding on it except your pride," Petra corrected firmly. "You have already won, Andrea. You fought for your horse, you fought for yourself. You didn't let anyone take away what matters to you. Everything after that is just icing, just proving to yourself what you're capable of. But you don't need to prove anything. You already know." Her words settled something in my chest, easing the tight knot of anxiety. She was right. I'd already faced the hardest test, already proven I could stand up for what mattered. This was just a competition, just a test, just another opportunity to do what Sultan and I loved doing together. Margaret arrived with more coffee and actual food, scrambled eggs and toast from the hotel breakfast buffet, presented with the firm instruction that I needed to eat something substantial, or I'd regret it later. I managed to get down half of it, my stomach too twisted with nerves to handle more. Our ride time was 11:30, which meant hours of waiting, of watching other riders go, of trying to stay calm and focused while my mind wanted to spiral into worst-case scenarios. I groomed Sultan until his coat gleamed, braided his mane with meticulous care, each plait perfect and tight and even. The repetitive work was meditative, centering, giving my anxious energy somewhere productive to go. At 10:30, I started getting dressed, pulling on my white breeches that I'd bleached 3 times to make sure they were pristine, my white competition shirt with its stock tie, my shad belly coat that made me look official and professional, and nothing like the nervous wreck I felt like inside. My tall boots were polished to a mirror shine, my gloves were new and supple, my hair was pulled back in a tight bun under my helmet. "You look like a champion," Margaret said when she saw me, and something in her voice made my eyes burn with threatened tears. "Don't," I warned, blinking rapidly. "Don't be nice to me right now, or I'll cry and ruin my makeup." "Then I'll just say this," Margaret said. "Whatever happens in that arena today, I'm proud of you. Everyone at Riverside is proud of you. You've earned this moment." At 11, I started warming up Sultan in the designated schooling area. He felt incredible beneath me, responsive and engaged, his movements fluid and powerful. We worked through our warm-up routine, the one Petra had drilled into us over countless training sessions, and I could feel Sultan settling into work mode, his focus narrowing, his body supple and ready. Petra appeared at the arena rail at 11:20, watching with her critical eye, calling out occasional corrections. "More inside leg and the shoulder in. Better. Good transition there. Keep your shoulders back, Andrea. Don't collapse through your core. Yes, like that. Perfect." At 11:25, the rider before me entered the competition arena, and I could hear the announcer's voice over the loudspeaker, tinny and distant. My heart rate kicked up another notch, my palms sweating inside my gloves. Sultan sensed my tension and tossed his head slightly, reminding me to breathe, to stay present, to focus on him rather than my anxiety. 5 minutes, the gate steward called out, and suddenly it was real. It was happening. There was no more time for doubt or fear or second-guessing. "Listen to me," Petra said, and her voice had that commanding quality that made me snap to attention. "You are ready. Sultan is ready. You have trained for this. You know every movement, every transition, every moment of that test. When you ride in there, you forget about the judges, you forget about the spectators, you forget about everything except the conversation between you and your horse. That is all that matters. Make that conversation beautiful, and everything else will follow." The rider before me finished, exiting the arena with a beaming smile that suggested a good ride. I heard applause, saw the scoreboard flash numbers that meant nothing to me in my current state of heightened nerves. The steward called my name, told me I could enter the arena when the bell rang. I walked Sultan toward the entrance, and Margaret caught my stirrup, looking up at me with fierce pride in her eyes. "Go show them what you're made of," she said simply. The bell rang, a clear tone that cut through the ambient noise. I squeezed Sultan forward into a working trot, entering the arena at A, and suddenly everything else fell away. The crowd faded to background noise, the judges became just observers, even my own anxiety receded. There was just Sultan beneath me, powerful and willing, and the test we were about to perform together. We halted at X, perfectly square, and I saluted the judge. Sultan stood like a statue, ears forward, waiting. I gathered my reins and asked for the first movement, a medium trot down the center line, and he responded instantly, his stride lengthening, his back swinging beneath me, every step ground covering and balanced. The test unfolded like a dance we both knew by heart. Shoulder in along the long side, Sultan's body curved perfectly around my inside leg. Flying changes through the diagonal, each one clean and prompt and balanced. Extended trot across the diagonal, Sultan's stride opening up, covering ground, powerful and expressive. Piaffe at X, his front legs lifting and falling in perfect rhythm, his hindquarters lowered, every step controlled and measured. I was aware of executing the movements, but not consciously thinking about them. My body and Sultan's moving together through muscle memory and training, and that indefinable connection that exists between horse and rider when everything clicks into place. Time felt elastic, both too fast and too slow, each moment crystal clear and slightly surreal. The final center line approached, and I rode Sultan into it with precision, feeling his eagerness, his willingness to give me everything he had. We halted at X, square and balanced, and I saluted the judge for the final time. As we exited the arena, the world rushed back in, the crowd noise, the announcer's voice, the pounding of my own heart. "How was it?" I asked Petra and Margaret, who were waiting at the exit, both looking like they might explode with suppressed emotion. "Perfect," Petra said, and coming from her, that one word meant everything. "That was absolutely perfect, Andrea. I have no notes. That was the ride of your life." My legs were shaking as I dismounted, adrenaline making me feel simultaneously energized and exhausted. Sultan was breathing hard but not distressed, pleased with himself in that way horses get when they know they've done well. I loosened his girth, threw a cooler over his back, and walked him around the warm-up area to let him cool down gradually. Other riders stopped me to offer congratulations, even though scores hadn't been posted yet, even though we didn't know how we'd placed. But apparently our test had been impressive enough that people took notice, that other competitors recognized what they'd seen. The attention made me uncomfortable and proud in equal measure, unused to being the center of positive focus. 20 minutes later, scores started posting on the board near the competition office. I didn't want to look, suddenly terrified that we'd somehow done worse than I thought, that my perception of the test had been wrong, that I'd let Sultan down. But Margaret dragged me over, and there it was, our names on the board with a score that made my breath catch. 74.8%. First place in our division, first place out of 32 riders, first place with a score that qualified us for nationals. I stared at the board, not quite believing what I was seeing, my brain struggling to process the numbers. We'd won. We'd actually won. Sultan and I had just won the regional championships. "I told you," Petra said, and her voice was rough with emotion she'd never admit to feeling. "I told you that you were ready." The award ceremony was held at the end of the day, all the division winners gathering in the main arena while spectators filled the stands. I rode Sultan in wearing my shad belly, now dusty and rumpled from a long day, but I'd never felt more proud. When they called our names and announced us as regional champions, the crowd applauded, and I felt tears sliding down my cheeks, hot and unstoppable. The ribbon was blue and massive, with long tails that Sultan immediately tried to eat. The trophy was silver and engraved with the competition name and year. But more than any physical prize, the moment itself felt like validation, like proof that choosing myself, choosing Sultan, choosing to fight for what mattered had been worth it. Margaret was crying openly in the stands, not even trying to hide it. Other riders from Riverside who'd made the trip were cheering. And Petra, stern, unflappable Petra, had the smallest smile on her face, the kind that meant she was deeply satisfied with how her training had paid off. That night, back at the hotel, I called my mother, who I'd been avoiding for weeks because I didn't want to hear her opinions about the divorce, about my choices, about any of it. But winning had given me courage, had made me feel like maybe I could handle whatever she had to say. "Mom," I said when she answered, "I need to tell you something. Richard and I got divorced. He tried to sell Sultan without my permission, and I had him arrested, and we're not together anymore." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I braced myself for disappointment or criticism, or "I told you so" commentary about rushing into marriage. "Good," my mother said finally, and her voice was firm. "I never liked him anyway. He was always so controlling, always trying to make you into someone you weren't. I'm glad you got rid of him. Are you okay?" The question, asked with genuine concern rather than judgment, made my throat tight. "I am," I said, and realized it was true. "I'm really okay, Mom. Better than okay. Sultan and I just won regionals. We're going to nationals. Your grandmother would be so proud," my mother said, and I could hear tears in her voice now. "She left you that money specifically so you could follow your dreams. She'd be thrilled to know you used it to buy Sultan, that you fought to keep him, that you're succeeding on your own terms." We talked for another hour, really talked in a way we hadn't in years, and I felt a bridge being rebuilt between us, a connection I'd let Richard damage through his constant criticism of my family, his insistence that they were too involved, too opinionated, too much. The drive home the next day felt different than the drive down had felt. I was exhausted, my body aching from the tension and physical exertion of competition, but I felt settled in a way I hadn't in years. Sultan traveled quietly in the trailer, probably as tired as I was, both of us ready to be home. Riverside Equestrian Club had organized a welcome back celebration, despite my protests that it was too much, that I didn't need any fuss. But when I pulled into the barn parking lot, there were balloons and a banner that read, "Regional Champions," and at least 40 people waiting to congratulate us. Sarah had made a photo collage of Sultan and me over the years, printed and mounted on foam board, showing our progression from that first nervous show to yesterday's championship ride. Looking at it, seeing the visual representation of our journey together, made me realize how much we'd both grown, how much we'd overcome, how much we'd achieved together. Jake was there with his guitar, and he played while people ate cake and drank champagne and shared stories. Tom had decorated Sultan's stall with blue ribbons and rosettes, making it look like a champion's quarters. The other horses in the barn watched the festivities with interest, probably wondering what all the fuss was about. "Speech!" someone called out, and others took up the chant. "Speech! Speech!" I stood on an overturned water bucket, feeling ridiculous and emotional and grateful all at once. Sultan was tied nearby, contentedly munching hay, completely unimpressed by all the attention. "I don't really know what to say," I started, and my voice cracked slightly. "Except thank you. Thank you for protecting Sultan when I couldn't be there. Thank you for standing up to Richard when he tried to take him. Thank you for being my community, my support system, my family when my actual family wasn't there. What happened over the past few months could have destroyed me. Instead, because of all of you, it made me stronger. It taught me that I'm worth fighting for, that my dreams matter, that I don't have to make myself small to deserve love and respect." I had to stop, my throat too tight with emotion to continue. Margaret was crying again, and so were several other riders. Even Petra looked suspiciously moist-eyed, though she'd deny it if asked. "Sultan and I are going to nationals," I continued when I could speak again. "And whether we do well or bomb completely, I'll know that I earned the right to be there. Not because someone gave me permission, not because I compromised away the things that mattered, but because I chose myself. I chose my passion. I chose to believe I was worth it. And that victory, that personal victory, means more than any ribbon or trophy ever could." The celebration continued late into the evening, people sharing food and stories and laughter. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I stood in Sultan's stall with him, just breathing in his familiar scent, running my hands over his warm coat, feeling grateful for this magnificent creature who'd been the catalyst for so much change in my life. "We did it," I whispered to him. "We really did it, boy." He turned his head and blew softly into my hair, that gentle gesture that meant contentment, affection, trust. I wrapped my arms around his neck and allowed myself to feel everything, the pride and relief and joy and grief and hope all mixed together into something that felt like healing. The next few months passed in a blur of training for nationals, finalizing divorce paperwork, selling the house I'd shared with Richard and finding a small rental closer to the barn, rebuilding my life piece by piece into something that felt authentic and true. I worked with Jennifer to invest my settlement wisely, ensuring I'd have financial security even as I poured resources into Sultan's training and competition schedule. Richard violated the restraining order once, showing up drunk at the barn 3 months after the divorce was finalized, demanding to see me, insisting we could work things out if I'd just be reasonable. Tom called the police, and Richard was arrested again, this time spending 2 nights in jail before being released with a stern warning from the judge that the next violation would result in serious jail time. After that, he left me alone. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd lost his job, that the criminal charges and the circumstances around them had made him unemployable in his industry, that he'd moved to another state to start over. I felt a twinge of guilt about that, but mostly I felt relief. He was gone, truly gone, no longer a threat to me or to Sultan. Nationals were held in Kentucky, at the most prestigious equestrian facility in the country, a sprawling complex that hosted international competitions and Olympic qualifiers. The level of riding was extraordinary. The best amateur riders in the country all gathered to compete for the national championship title. Sultan and I didn't win. We placed 5th in our division, a respectable finish, but not a podium placement. But riding in that arena, surrounded by that level of talent, representing my region and my barn and my own hard work, felt like success regardless of the placing. I'd earned the right to be there, and that was enough, more than enough. A year after the divorce, I ran into Richard's mistress at a coffee shop near the barn. I recognized her immediately, though I'd never spoken to her, had only seen her that one time counting cash while Richard tried to steal my horse. She was standing in line ahead of me, and when she turned around, our eyes met and held. "You're Andrea," she said, and it wasn't a question. She looked older than I remembered, tired, her makeup not quite hiding the shadows under her eyes. "I am," I confirmed, unsure where this was going, preparing myself for confrontation or blame. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for my part in what happened. Richard told me the horse was half his, that you'd agreed to sell it but were dragging your feet. I didn't know he was lying. I didn't know he was trying to steal from you." I studied her face, looking for deception, but all I saw was genuine regret. "What happened to the Bahamas trip?" I asked, unable to help myself. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Never happened. Richard got arrested before we could book it, and then he lost his job, and suddenly he didn't have money for vacations or anything else. Turned out I wasn't interested in him when he couldn't pay for things. Funny how that works." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, two women who'd been caught in Richard's orbit, both damaged by him in different ways. "I hope you're doing better," she said finally. "I heard you won some big competition, that you're doing really well." "I am," I said simply. "I really am." After she left, I sat in the coffee shop thinking about choices and consequences, about the paths our lives take based on the decisions we make, about how differently things could have turned out if I'd chosen Richard over Sultan, security over passion, peace over authenticity. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, trapped in a marriage that was slowly suffocating her, too afraid to make the hard choice, too conditioned to accommodate to stand up for herself. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone I barely recognized. The woman I was now, the woman sitting in this coffee shop with dirt under her fingernails and hay in her hair, wearing barn clothes and not caring who saw her, that woman was someone I liked, someone I was proud to be, someone who knew her own worth and wouldn't compromise it for anyone. 2 years after the divorce, I married Jake, the farrier who'd offered wisdom and kindness when I needed it most. The wedding was small and casual, held at the barn with Sultan serving as ring bearer, his mane braided with flowers. Petra officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion, and her ceremony was brief and unsentimental and perfect. Margaret cried through the whole thing, of course. Some things never changed. Jake and I bought a small farm together, 10 acres with a barn that could hold 4 horses comfortably. Sultan had his own private paddock with a run-in shelter, good grass, and a perfect view of the house. I could watch him from our bedroom window, could see him grazing in the morning light, could reassure myself at any moment that he was safe and happy and exactly where he belonged. We added 2 more horses to our little herd, a young prospect that I was bringing up through the levels, and an older school horse that Jake had rescued from a bad situation. The farm was never silent, always full of the sounds of horses nickering, chickens clucking in their coop, the barn cats chasing mice through the hayloft. It was nothing like the pristine, carefully curated life I'd lived with Richard in that expensive house in Oak Hills Estates. It was messy and chaotic and required constant work and attention. It was absolutely perfect. Sultan competed until he was 17, winning multiple regional championships, qualifying for nationals 3 more times, accumulating ribbons and trophies and titles that filled a cabinet in our living room. But his greatest gift wasn't the prizes or the accolades. It was the fact that he'd been the catalyst for me reclaiming my own life, for me learning that I was worth fighting for me discovering that happiness required authenticity more than it required approval. On his 17th birthday, I retired him from competition, wanting him to enjoy his remaining years without the stress and physical demands of showing. He spent his days grazing, napping in the sun, playing with his pasture mates, occasionally giving lessons to beginner riders who needed a calm, experienced horse to build their confidence. Sometimes I'd go out to his paddock late at night, unable to sleep, needing the comfort of his presence. He'd leave his hay and walk over to me, lowering his head so I could scratch behind his ears, standing quietly while I talked about my day, my dreams, my gratitude for everything he'd given me. "You saved my life," I told him one night, the words coming out soft in the darkness. "I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. If I'd lost you, if I'd let Richard take you away, I would have lost myself. You gave me a reason to fight. You taught me I was worth fighting for." Sultan, as always, simply stood there, solid and warm and patient, asking nothing, giving everything, being exactly what I needed exactly when I needed it. Years later, when he finally passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 24, I grieved deeply, but without regret. He'd lived a good life, a loved life, a life where he was valued and treasured and protected. He'd been mine until the very end, and I'd been his. And that partnership, that bond, had shaped everything that came after. I buried him on our farm, under the oak tree where he'd spent countless afternoons napping in the shade. Jake carved a wooden marker, simple and beautiful, that read, Sultan, European champion, regional champion, and most importantly, beloved friend. You taught me that some things are worth fighting for. The day after his burial, a package arrived at the farm. Inside was a letter from Petra, now retired and living in Germany again, and a small brass plate engraved with Sultan's name and competition record. The letter was characteristically brief. Andrea, I heard about Sultan's passing. He was an exceptional horse, but more exceptional was what he helped you become. Not many riders have the courage to choose their passion over comfort, to fight for what they love even when the cost is high. You did that. You became the rider, the competitor, the woman you were always meant to be. Sultan was proud to carry you. I was proud to teach you. Be well. Petra. I hung the brass plate in the barn, in the stall that had been Sultan's, the stall that now housed my young prospect who showed similar promise, similar grace, similar partnership potential. Every time I walked past it, I remembered not just the horse but the lessons, not just the victories but the cost of achieving them, not just the joy but the courage it took to choose that joy over someone else's approval. And every time I rode, every time I entered an arena or worked through a training session or simply sat on a horse's back and felt that connection, that wordless communication, that partnership built on trust and respect and mutual understanding, I thought about Richard, about the ultimatum he'd given me, about the choice he'd forced me to make. I thought about what I would have become if I'd chosen differently, if I'd sold Sultan, if I'd sacrificed my passion to save a marriage that wasn't worth saving. I thought about the version of myself who'd lived small and careful and constantly accommodating, trying to earn love by making herself less. And I felt grateful, endlessly grateful, that I'd had the courage to choose differently, that I'd chosen the horse, that I'd chosen myself, that I'd learned the hardest and most important lesson of all, that you can't build a life worth living on someone else's terms, that happiness requires authenticity more than it requires approval, that some things, some relationships, some passions, are worth fighting for even when the fight costs you everything else. Sultan had taught me that. Richard had taught me that. The choice between them had taught me that. And I'd spent every day since making sure that lesson, that knowledge, that hard-won understanding shaped every decision I made, every relationship I built, every step I took toward the life I wanted, rather than the life others expected me to live. It was the greatest gift anyone had ever given me. And I'd earned it, fought for it, protected it, honored it every single day. That was worth more than any ribbon, any trophy, any championship title. That was the real victory. That was what it meant to choose yourself, to fight for what mattered, to live authentically even when the cost was high. And I would make that choice again, every single time, for the rest of my life.